What's up guys, it's James back again, and this will kind of be part 2 of this little combo video about the fish deck, but this time we're going to just cover the frog engine. And I hope this can be really useful to anybody who is playing frogs in general. As you can see, you know, flip-flop frog and the third dupe are not always things that are played in other frog decks, but basically everything else is pretty applicable no matter what frog variant you're playing. And if you hate frogs in general and want me to go talk about other decks, you know, it's coming. I just think a lot of people have really been requesting guides and more information about how to play the fish deck correctly. And it's a topic that, to be honest, I know a lot about and I'm happy to discuss, because I still feel like a lot of people don't do the frog stuff correctly either. So just to get started, one thing that I want to touch on is I always want to be tributing another monster with Substitoad, right? Everyone knows, you know, send everything from your deck and end on double dupe. You know, I don't even really need to get into all that. But it's just to say that I feel like normal summoning Substitoad, specialing swap from your deck, and sending the Treeborn to grave and bouncing the swap back is a sort of like very poor use of your Substitoad. You know, everyone knows like sending everything from deck, that's like almost like 10 future fusions or something like that. 5 future fusions, and you know, you're getting all these +1s in the grave. That's super good, but also if you can stick the sub on the field for multiple turns, that's like even better, you know? That's where you're really generating a lot of advantage. So either way, compared to just getting a guy from deck and foolish burialing one Treeborn, I think that either of those other options, milling through and sending everything and setting up double dupe, or keeping on the field for multiple turns, you know, that's really what you want to try to set up. And like, Substitoad's like one of the best cards in your deck. It's one of the best cards in the game. It's one of the best cards in the game's history. So like using it like, you know, it's like heavy storming for a 1-for-1, you know, it's kind of really undervaluing what it can do. So, you know, obviously everyone knows tributing another guy is good. So I don't have to get too much into that, but really to be specific, you know, if I'm ever opening swap and another water and Substitoad, I don't very often, you know, special the swap and tribute it with the sub, you know, maybe in matchups that play a lot of floodgates, but I'm much more inclined to, you know, normal summon the swap, send the Treeborn, bounce it back, and then just try to do everything next turn. There is some risk to that, obviously, but even when I have a Dupe Frog and Substitoad, for example, I might just set the dupe. I'm not really inclined to go sub tribute off for swap. You know, this is not exactly a Monarch deck. Maybe those strategy that those kind of lines would be a little more common. It certainly does come up. I mean, that's the great thing about Substitoad is even when you're not doing your great wombo combo, you know, tribute everything, it's still like getting swap, which is still very good, turning your engine on. So that's the first thing I want to touch on. And you know, as well as some very basic like sequencing when you do this, you know, whenever you're tributing anything, let's say you did tribute the Treeborn, the first thing I want to go for is the second Treeborn. And I'll give a brief explanation of why this matters. You know, if they have back row, this really only matters if they have back row, but just by using the Substitoad effect and them letting it resolve, you basically know they don't have Royal Oppression. So you're trying to maybe deduce what they do have set. And a lot of times, I think they would also book a moon or use an interruption like a Regeki Break or a Wind Blast or, you know, Gemini Spark on the first Substitoad activation. If for whatever reason they didn't, like if they maybe didn't realize what they were doing, they weren't thinking too far ahead, whatever. You know, I want to get as many of the frogs that I want to mill into my graveyard as quickly as possible, you know, and that way if, you know, as I'm sending all this stuff, they realize, oh wait, I want to negate this or I want to stop the effect. Like I've already gotten the stuff I want to engrave. If I did it in a different order, there might be different choke points that they have. Specifically, the big one to take note of is when you special the swap from deck. And if you want to use its effect to send, which, you know, you have to do to send the Substitoad, as Substitoad is obviously not a frog. But if you want to do that, then they have an opportunity to respond here that you don't get to use priority with the Substitoad. So something like a torrential is very devastating here. So in the example that you know, if you didn't tribute Treeborn, for example, like, and you just went swap first, effect to send, and they torrential, you know, maybe you can still send the Treeborn with the swap effect, but you're just losing out on a lot of value and a lot of thinning that is really the whole point you went for that play in the first place. So the swaps I often go for last, you know. Again, I think that might be pretty basic, but the exact order to do all these things, it's basically like the stuff you want to mill the most to least. Like, just in case they do stop you at some point along the way, then you can get the worst cards out of the deck first. Number 2, this is probably going to be the most complicated part, and it's really about what frogs to leave in deck and what boards to set up on. So let's say you are in the position that you have tributed off, a Treeborn Frog. Maybe you used a brain control on their monster, whatever. Just anytime you're resolving sub. So I think the best way to describe this is just, you're almost always gonna want a special dupe, right? That's like, there are a couple lines that you go for just swaps, but I don't even want to get into that. If you're sequencing, you send the Treeborns first. Pretty commonly, you might just send everything. Like if you're really trying to turbo into an OTK, draw into more removal, then, and again, if they don't have back row that you're playing around, I think it's often correct to just, swap, send the sub, tribute that off, get more swaps, send, everything. So you end on the double dupe and you've thinned your deck the maximum amount that you can. But occasionally, like I touched on in the prior video, a card that I might leave in deck is Unifrog or a flip-flop frog, even if I do all this, because, resolving all this puts you in such a good spot to begin with that one of the only ways they're going to be able to beat you is maybe with a card like Royal Oppression or, something weird to floodgate you out. So if that's the case, if they did draw into an oppression and use it on a following turn, I want to have the maximum chances of being able to find the Unifrog fast before they can maybe pressure over these. So oftentimes drawing the Unifrog for turn on my following turn or 2 turns down or whatever, and normal summoning next to these guys can be quite strong in its own right. So if the point of thinning your deck of all these is to eliminate a lot of dead draws, Unifrog is the opposite of a dead draw in that particular case. So kind of same thing with flip-flop. If you think they're going to put down some, big monsters, a lot of synchros or floodgate monsters, or you're worried about like a lot of set monsters and something like zombies, this can be good to leave in deck as well for basically the same reasons. And the good thing is, this is quite a low risk, I would say, like proposition, because when these dupes do die, you would be searching these from deck potentially anyway. In some scenario, you draw into it and it helps you because they have a floodgate up, but otherwise you just are going to search it anyway and thin it in the same way. So you don't lose that much by keeping it in deck in some scenarios. All of this is sort of like with a big asterisk of like sometimes. And actually I'll get into a little bit of that now with when exactly I'm doing what. So again, like I'm tributing off there and I'm going through my deck, and really now the big part is if I want to leave the Substitoad on the field, like what am I going to leave in deck? Because the whole point of leaving the Substitoad on the field, I'm always sending these also, I'm always sending the Treeborns. The whole point of leaving the sub on the field is that when you get back to Treeborn the following turn, you're going to end on dupe sub or something in the most basic version of this. And then on the following turn, you get back to Treeborn, you're able to use the sub again and tribute that off and basically just, snowball your advantage. Like it's as if you're tributing a Treeborn for a Monarch, just because you're able to special another guy from deck and just convert it into something useful. Maybe do that over a couple turns, or maybe that's when you decide to tribute the sub off. It's important not to get greedy when you do all this, like how much advantage do you really need, especially in this like OTK style deck. Maybe you don't need to go for these kind of like long multi-turn, incremental advantage building plays, but they definitely do come up, and some combination of dupe, uni, flip-flop, and swap are what you want to leave in deck. And like again, assuming an open board, I might do something like swap, send all the subs. Depending on what I wanted to go for over the next couple of turns, I might even send one of the Dupe Frogs. Like, let's just operate on these four for right now that you leave in deck. So this kind of gives you the most options, but I will say that flip-flop and uni are kind of like, it's kind of one or the other. Like a lot of the matchups that uni is really useful in, the back row heavy matchups, flip-flop is not so good in. So usually I'm sending one of these to grave. But there are definitely situations I leave both, especially if it's like early game, I don't necessarily know what I'm playing. Because again, these cards are not necessarily bad to draw into over the next couple turns. but like the more you leave in deck, the more likely it is you will actually draw them. So that's definitely something to consider. So, you know, just to show what can be done here on the following turn, you're getting back the Treeborn, you're tributing that off, you're setting up with a dupe. Maybe you're getting a third dupe, or, you know, the Unifrog there. You get the Unifrog first, and then attack with it, switch that to defense, and then tribute that off for the dupe. But if you keep leaving the Substitoad on field, what can end up happening is, like, if you left the dupe in deck, you can end up setting up a board like this, again, over a couple turns. But as you're doing all this, you might end up with your board space kind of locked. So that's one reason to leave the Swap Frog in deck. Find yourself in this situation, 3 dupes, a sub, a Treeborn. You can tribute this off, get the swap. You can send a Dupe Frog from the field if you want to. Sometimes that's good to build up your hand in the Coelacanth deck specifically. But what you can do is Swap Frog, you know, bounce itself or bounce the Substitoad. Next turn, you're like bounce the Treeborn as well because you have a second one in grave. And you can just keep building incremental advantage that way. So leaving a swap in the deck definitely comes up. But the biggest part about all this is just thinking about what you're going to want to draw a turn or two down the line or late game, what might be useful left in deck. So it's all very matchup dependent, and I think doing that, you know, blow by blow, like that would be very difficult for me to go into in a video like this. So I just kind of want to say that whenever I leave the sub on the board, which I'm not necessarily always inclined to do in the first place because I feel like it's a little bit risky into things like Caius, but when I do that, you know, I'm often leaving some combination of these, another dupe, maybe both dupes. And that's just so that I have the most options to build my advantage with Substitoad and really maximize its value over the following turns. Because that's what you're trying to do by leaving the Substitoad on the board. If you're not going to leave the Substitoad on the board, you might as well just send everything, I feel like, or just keep the Uni flip-flop in deck like I described. So the last, not the last thing, but the next thing I want to discuss is kind of just like tips and tricks, because there's a lot of like other plays that come up with all this stuff. Some of the main ones being things with like Fishboard, Unifrog, you know, Salvage, things like that, and also Oystermeister. So one of my best turn 1 plays, honestly, if I'm not just like planning on killing you somehow, if you open a hand of 1-for-1 and Oystermeister, pitching this for the 1-for-1, and then you're getting the sub from deck, and you can normal summon the Oyster. And because Oyster says, you know, whenever it's sent from the field, when you tribute that off, you're getting another token. And then you have 3 bodies to play with instead of just the 2 as before. And now this is a situation where I usually make double dupe. Flip-flop is also a consideration perhaps, but this feels like a very safe position to me where I'm comfortable leaving the Substitoad on the field. Same thing in a sense with Fishborg. You know, Fishborg plus Substitoad is an insane engine in itself, and being able to basically just convert any card in your hand into Dupe Frogs on field, or, you know, you can always tribute the Fishboard for a Swap Frog and bounce the Swap Frog bag. You could convert cards in hand into Swap Frogs essentially. But that's another situation where I might even take a neg to build up this board because I know that I'm going to plus so much in the following turns. And that's again a situation where I might want to leave some amount of frogs in deck. With cards like Salvage, you know, that's a situation where I am much more likely to use my sub early, whether it's just for the swap to send the individual Treeborn, like only that monster, like I said, I wouldn't ever do. But also, if I have the salvage already, I don't really care about tributing off the sub, because I can just end on double dupe, and on my following turn, I can always just play the salvage, get back the sub, and kind of have all the benefits of having left the sub there in the first place, because I can just normal summon it and tribute the Treeborn, but I'm not as vulnerable during their turn to my board being cracked as I would with leaving the sub up. So that is another situation with the salvage. The other thing that I want to stress that is important to take advantage of, while you're comboing, if you have something like a Treeborn in hand, you shouldn't forget that when you special swap and you send the sub or whatever, you can bounce the swap, use the frog summon on the Treeborn, and then tribute that off with the sub. So this is a great way to just, otherwise you're stuck with a dead Treeborn in hand basically, but now you have a swap in hand, which is going to be quite useful to you. So you can just convert that as you go. Similarly, a Dupe Frog, maybe if you already have one dupe graved somehow, then this can be very useful because, if you only have one dupe in deck, you might be thinking that, oh, okay, well, I have to end on dupe sub, but then, you can tribute off this, get the swap, bounce it back, normal summon the dupe, and now you have double dupe set up, which is, better protection. So these are just a number of kind of, tips and tricks, so to speak, that can really help you maximize as you're doing these combos. And again, in all these, like the prior things apply, like which I want to leave on the board, which I want to leave in deck. It all is and what exact end board I want to end on really just depends on the matchup and the game state in general. So I also want to talk about some reasons to deviate from kind of what I just described and how I, in actual games, make these decisions, because a lot of this is also based on my cards in hand. So I have a couple cards here that really affect my decision-making process, and I want to talk about them basically in order. So if I have a hand with a Threatening Roar and I have an option to use Substitoad, that's a situation where I'm much more inclined to go into dupe sub rather than double dupe. Flip-flop also gets very strong with Threatening Roar, but let's just table that for the second, because as I've been stressing throughout this video, this is a board that's able to get cracked, and they could attack over the sub for a lot of damage. But of course, they're going to have to remove the Dupe Frog first. So then you can protect the sub with the Roar, and you're probably getting your Treeborn back. So you can basically have the same advantage engine next turn. So that's a situation that I will end on the sub in attack. But that's also if I do have that, then I'm definitely going to want to leave more frogs than less in deck, right? Because I am going to need them to summon off the sub next turn. And, specifically, again, flip-flop frog, because if they do pop the dupe, whatever, and then, they start pressuring me somehow, flip-flop frog might definitely be a card that I want to get from the deck on the following turn after I've used the Roar to kind of come back and stall out. So the priorities of which ones I want to leave definitely change as well. Moray is a very big factor in all this, because every time I talk about leaving the frogs in deck, there's much less of a danger in this deck to doing so, because every water that you draw can be Moray fuel. So in all honesty, there's times that I don't mill all the subs. There's times that, I err on the side of leaving more frogs, just because, I'm always milling the Treeborns, of course, but if I'm worried about my Morays being dead late game, or the game state is such that top decking a frog wouldn't hurt me that much, then I don't need to mill as much, basically, because water for me is not a bad top deck in that situation. Brain control, that's again, I'm not going to go for a sub into swap alone line, especially if I have brain control in hand. I'll probably wait for them to commit and then combo up that. That just kind of seems like Yu-Gi-Oh! 101. But, and then, these cards, kind of same thing. I'm much more inclined to try to push my advantage with multiple monsters tributing for sub if I have something like a Storm or a Cold Wave in hand, because I know that this will go through the back row. If I'm sitting here waiting around, I'm going sub into swap or those combo plays with the sub without the Storm, then it could easily be disrupted by, Oppression, Gemini Spark, whatever. But if I have the Storm, I have a lot of assurance it's going to resolve, so I feel more comfortable waiting. And then the last card is Coelacanth, main point of the deck, but not relevant for any other frog decks. And so that is, again, a point where if I ever have sub, if I have these, then I'm very happy. This is the exact situation that I'm very happy to swap Send a Treeborn. And then I just bounce this back, and assuming I have any other water in hand, which I basically always do, then on my following turn, I'm always storming, specialing, I get back Treeborn, obviously, and then special this and tributing. So I'm much less concerned with playing this long incremental grind game if I already have access to a good setup with Coelacanth. And by the same token, I don't need to build such a big board of multiple dupes. If it gets to that point, and I think I might be Coelacanthing soon, then I'm pretty much fine to start going into swap frogs and then bouncing them back to my hand. So I'll have more fuel for the Fishborg or the coelacanth discards later on. So these are just a number of cards that, like, if I see them in my opening hand, I would do everything I described, like, in a slightly different way, just based on the situation at hand. So that'll be about it for the frog combos today. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you can see that there's really a lot of depth involved. Like, I kind of just scratched the tip of the iceberg as far as the decision-making process in the game. So over the next week, I hope to upload some other fish gameplay videos, especially my RBT rulers run, that you can kind of see how these things play out in practice. And I hope to do some streams in the future that can show you the kind of live decision-making process as well. But given there's a lot of misconceptions about how the frog stuff functions, I hope this can be kind of a primer in how it actually plays out, and the different lines you can do. So with that being said, hope you guys enjoy the fish deck and can tear up some locals with it. And peace, like, comment, subscribe, all that.